building software, or buying it. Pendo is software that makes your software better. Using analytics to understand behavior across your apps, your team can easily identify how users are interacting with your product so you can provide the best experience possible. Pendo also helps you use this quantitative data, along with collected qualitative data, to help you understand how your users feel so you can deliver the best product for your customers. Comprehensive data collected through analytics can be used to create personalized in-app guides that can lead users through your software, assisting greater adoption of the product, and provide a more intuitive user experience. With robust segmentation, Pendo helps you understand individual behavior so you can deliver communication in context to specific groups of users. Hearing directly from users about their experience provides deep insight into what works and what doesn't. With feedback, you can centralize all user requests and prioritize them so that your developers are focused on building the best version of your product. Pendo is the only complete product platform that combines feedback, targeted in-app guides, and analytics, so you can identify and address pain points in the user journey to ensure greater engagement. Whether your users are customers or employees, the power of Pendo is available across web and mobile applications without the need for engineering. Pendo, software that makes your software better.
Welcome back to the Product-Led Festival. Before we get going with the next helping of inspiring content, we'd like to take a moment to thank our sponsors for helping us bring this event to your screens. And don't forget, you can access even more content from exclusive articles and interviews to all past and future events on demand, as well as templates and frameworks by becoming a PLA member. Head over to productledalliance.com for more info. Enjoy the next session.
Hi everyone, and welcome back to the Product-Led Festival. Thanks for tuning in to our next session, which is a panel discussion on data-driven decision-making. And I'm really pleased to introduce our moderator for this session, Anjana, and I will hand it over to you.
Thanks, Caitlin. Hello, everyone. Love for my fellow panelists to kind of join me. Thanks, Mike. Hi, Sari. And Kevin. Awesome. Well, thank you guys so much for joining us. Again, as Caitlin mentioned, we're going to be talking about data-driven decision-making as a group. I'm going to be the moderator for the session. My name is Anjana Tai. I'm currently the director of product at a company called Arity, where we're trying to make transportation smarter, safer, and more accessible to all. And we do that through what we call telematics data that we collect from vehicles out on the road, as well as people's mobile devices when they're sitting inside of cars, being driven around or driving those cars. And so I'm really excited to get a chance to talk with Kevin and Mike and Sari on what it is that makes our job as product people really important in making smart decisions for a company, and how do we leverage data within the business that we collect about our customers as well as about our business partners to drive better engagement as well as business results. And so with that, I'd love for for the panelists to introduce themselves. So I'll throw it over to you, Mike, to give a quick introduction, give us a little bit about the role that you're currently playing at your current company, and maybe a little bit about your past experience with data over the course of your career.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. So my name is Mike Pilevsky. I'm the Chief Product Officer at SmallPDF. In my current role, I actually lead our product development team, so product, data, design, UX, and engineering. A little bit about SmallPDF. The name, I think, tells it all. We are essentially an editor for PDF documents and all kinds of documents. We are used by roughly 60 million monthly active users every single month. So as you can imagine, that's a lot of data. That's also, sometimes it's easier to look into data to understand our customers than talking to them individually, because they are not a homogeneous group. So data plays a really important role in our decision making. Prior to SmallPDF, I was COO at a company called Typeform. And prior to that, I led product engineering and sort of related teams at 3 other scale-ups in San Francisco, mostly in mobile advertising technology and marketing automation. I think I can pass it on.
Why don't Kevin, you go next?
Sure. My name is Kevin McGinn, and I'm currently a senior product manager at Skyscanner. Skyscanner is a metasearch travel platform. So you can compare flights, hotels, car hire. I'm currently based in London in the UK. Previously, I was based in the United States, a lot on the West Coast in San Francisco and Seattle. I have a background both in product, but as an engineer as well at various companies. I've done a little bit in retail at companies like Nordstrom and startups doing kind of on-demand logistics. At Skyscanner, I utilize a lot of analytics to measure what our travelers are doing, and hope to talk a little bit about that today. And sorry.
Great. I'm Sari. I currently work as head of product at Songkick. Songkick, if you haven't heard of it, is a small tech company. We are a content discovery platform, and we help users have more great live music experiences, connecting them to the artists that they love. I previously worked in product roles similarly in the kind of entertainment and media industries. And my journey with data definitely started straight out of university when I entered into product. I've always had a real interest in it. I've always had an interest in like data platforms, pulling data myself and analyzing it. So much so that one of my former managers actually asked me if I just wanted to be a data analyst. I obviously decided that I would like to continue being a product manager, but generally data is one of the things about product I enjoy the most.
Awesome. Thank you all for that great introduction. I'd love for us to kind of jump into some discussion. And as we think about it, data will probably be a very core part of our discussion, but I'd love for us to also think a little bit about what makes for good decision making, right? And so my first question to all of you, I'll let you guys jump in here, is kind of what are the hallmarks, what are the features and characteristics of decisions you've made in your career, especially in the product side of the world, that have turned out well, and what were the features that really allowed you to make those good decisions?
I'm happy to jump in just with something I thought when I read this question, which is around, having a little bit of uncertainty. I think that little bit of uncertainty when you're making a decision or a data-driven decision means that you often haven't over-engineered making that decision. It means that you've kind of you've taken enough time to understand something, to have a feeling for what's right, and to have proof that that's the right direction to go in. But I think often if there's a little bit of uncertainty, it means there's still a bit of a leap, and that leap often feels like what gets really exciting outcomes versus things that That's not to say that decisions that you absolutely know are right are not good decisions. They can be great. But I think when you are always waiting to be absolutely sure, often it means you're probably not making enough decisions, or you're taking too long to make decisions. And actually being able to hone the skill of making decisions that you feel pretty confident in, but can't absolutely say are 100% right, I think can be a really great skill.
I agree. And I think something for me, maybe a little bit of a cop out, but kind of along the lines of the data answer is having a form of measurement both before and after. A lot of times I think we think, a good decision is one that works out well, but I think for me, a good decision is one that you have some idea of what the outcome was, whether it was good or bad, and you have some sort of way to measure what has occurred. So even if it's not, as Sari said, it's the perfect decision, or you have perfect clarity if it was the perfect decision, if you have a way of measuring what's occurred, I think that's a kind of a hallmark of a good decision or a good decision-making process.
I think from my perspective, good decisions maximize learning. I would say most of the bad decisions I made in my life are very easily reversible. And I think, outside of some really big things like maybe M&A decisions or, back in the old days, waterfall projects that would take 18 months and you really had to spend a lot of time justifying them. Most of the current decisions, we can reverse. We A/B test, we reverse them. So I think the key question is, what are the sort of 3-4 most important questions you're trying to answer, and how quickly you can learn? And a good decision essentially allows you to answer those questions with minimum effort and time. And then once you have an answer, you're actually not making any decisions, right? You're just following on your answer. So the certainty is not making a decision. This is just an outcome of your earlier decision on how you actually want to arrive at an answer.
Yeah, I think those are great. I really appreciated kind of, Sari, what you're talking about in terms of like the timeliness of it, right? There's a certain element of wanting to prevent ourselves from getting into like analysis paralysis, and having a degree of certainty actually precludes us from actually doing maybe what you're talking about, right, Mike? Which is like learning, which is a key part of making smarter decisions over time. And I really like that, Kevin, right? The idea of being able to measure. How can you know the quality of a decision if you can't metricize it, right, in some way? So I think those are really great things for us to continue to talk and touch on. I'd love to kind of get into maybe a little bit of the weeds a little bit and hear from you guys some stories around where each of you have kind of played around with data, either in your current roles or in past roles, to really help you understand what's going on with the customer, either identifying some insights or nuggets of wisdom, or identifying problems. And how did you leverage the data to make smarter decisions on what to build next?
Happy to jump in. I think, first of all, I would say data means different things to different people. For me, data doesn't mean just quantitative data. Going and observing someone and seeing how they immerse with your product is also data. It's just data used for a different purpose. I think for us, recently, we essentially asked ourselves a very big question, which is, how should we segment the 60 million monthly active users? So it's it's every kind of startup, we arrived at some of those insights pretty late on, and essentially we took 2 approaches. The one approach was essentially to run a survey and to hear from the customers themselves how they think they would segment themselves. So not really look at their behavior, but really look at what they think they are doing, what they think they want to achieve, and then independently, we run essentially a clustering algorithm on the behavioral data to see how the behaviors of our customers differ. We run it kind of in the order, even though clustering is much easier, we wanted to start with the survey, so the behavioral data would not influence how we designed the survey. Luckily for us, the 2 sort of different approaches arrived at exactly the same outcome in the end. Meaning actually the segments were more or less the same. There was maybe small differences in terms of usage, what's reported and what's actually done, but mostly it's the same. And how we're going to use this data, obviously we're going to personalize now our product so we can actually tailor this to the needs of individual customers based on what they are trying to do. But also we'll look at updating our pricing, so the people who, for example, use this for very narrow use cases won't be paying as much as the super users who are essentially using everything possible with our platform on a very regular basis.
Great. I think I had an interesting experience in my last role. I think what was so interesting about it is what happens when you get access to data that either no one else in the company knew that you had access to, or that hadn't been used before, which is always a great thing, because it's like a new treasure trove of actually all this stuff has been here the whole time. It was a subscription product, so it was kind of subscription media. And what I came to realize, I think completely by accident, was that there was a lot more information in iTunes Connect around actual subscription behavior. So who subscribed when, how long they'd been on the platform before they unsubscribed or continued to, kind of renewed, all those kind of behaviors. But it was down to like individual user information, not identifiable information, but obviously that wasn't important. Just how they were behaving. And previously to that, we could kind of see how many people were churning every month, and how many people were subscribing every month, but we didn't understand anything around how long were people staying subscribed before they churned. And no in-depth analysis has been done there. It's a very manual process. You have to kind of download the data month by month. And then I downloaded it all month by month and stitched it together in a giant Excel, which I think is why my former manager thought I might as well just be an analyst. Sometimes the quickest, even if it's tedious, way of analyzing data I found to be the best, instead of trying to learn how to create a script to combine all the data together. And it was great. We found, I think the main insight I found, which now maybe we all know is quite common churn behavior, is that a lot of people churn on day 0. So you sign up and you immediately unsubscribe. I don't know if other people do that. I definitely do it. It's the easiest way to make sure I won't forget to unsubscribe in a month if I'm not sure I want a platform. And so was able to kind of recognize actually the problem isn't necessarily people not getting value out of the product over a longer period. It's that the behavior is actually just preventing wanting to spend any more money than that first month. And it was great because identifying a problem you didn't know you had means you can start to think around solutions and how to convince users and actually start even targeting those kind of users that you didn't know exist. And so I think that was great. And I always recommend that product managers just have an interest in looking into data. And even if you have big data analysis teams, it doesn't mean you should disqualify your skills. I wasn't using any kind of special techniques to look through that data. I just happened to find it and was patient enough to stitch it all together. And just, averages and pie charts and bar charts. There was nothing really exciting there. And it still told a really interesting story. So I always think, definitely don't be nervous or feel like, if you can't, write program in R, or you can't do anything really exciting, there's no point you trying to analyze data, because even just the patience and having the right kind of questions is usually the most important thing.
Yeah, I would really second that last point. I have some experience as an engineer. I don't have a lot of experience as a data analyst or anything along those lines. So I have, a base level understanding of SQL so that I can pull data. And in my example that I'll share is, I was able to pull some data from using SQL. But I would just basically do a big data dump and pull it into Excel and start manipulating it there. I had no idea what I was doing. I was just kind of pulling it down and doing what I could. I didn't have access to a data scientist, but it served me wonders. And I think, for my story, I think it's kind of another side of what Mike was talking about. I think it's great to talk to customers and great to get their insight. I think sometimes what's interesting is, the data, you have to have both, because customers will sometimes tell you something completely different than what the data will tell you. And for my story, we had designs where, I was working in a checkout, so a retail checkout. And our customers were telling us, we really like this. This is amazing. This is the greatest. And then, I was essentially pulling down a bunch of data where all of our customers were getting stuck at one point. And, all of our user testing was, we really like this. We really like this. We really like having all these options. These options are great. Please don't take away our options. But what I was finding in this data is that all of our options were essentially causing a sense of confusion. We only, at the time, 19% of our travelers were getting through this one point in time. And simplifying that increased it exponentially, right? Even though our customers liked this, it was creating this barrier, and is really overall helpful to kind of kind of make it a little bit more simple, making it a little bit easier, kind of reduce the options for them, to give them a better experience. So kind of playing with that data, I wouldn't have seen that otherwise. I wouldn't have seen that friction point without just kind of essentially doing a big data dump and seeing that they were getting stuck at that point in time.
Those are some really great examples. Also loving the chat. Thank you all for sharing where you're coming from and attending from today. And also keep the questions coming. I'm going to try to keep some time at the end to answer those. Hopefully some of them will address as a part of the conversation as well. But what I really loved in all of your guys' examples is the intermixing between, the quantitative data, right? Like looking at what customers actually do, their actual behaviors, and what they say they do, right? Whether that be surveys or interviews or observations of customers. And so I think one of the really unique things about being in product is, sometimes you have to use data to validate why you want to make a decision, but sometimes it also comes down to intuition. And I'd love to hear a little bit from you guys, how you weigh which to utilize and which to leverage when you're making decisions in your day-to-day work.
Yeah, I think it's definitely a tough one for me. I would say often it's balanced. A lot of it just comes down to, what's efficient and what you actually have available. Like sometimes you don't have a choice. And sometimes you simply don't have the amount of time you would like. So you might have the data available to make a certain decision, but just not the amount of time to dig through and find the insights you need. And then I also like what Mike said about decisions are always reversible. And so that's a big thing, right? Like the amount of, I'd be hesitant to use just intuition for a decision that was not reversible or could have really big consequences. But intuition for a decision that's, easily reversible feels a lot less worrying. Just to check, is my connection okay? I'm getting a bit of, okay, that's great. So yes, I'd say, sometimes you just don't have the time. And often if you can reverse it, then you need to be a little less worried. I think intuition also is one of those things that often, it's not a complete guess. Often intuition is built from your own experiences. Particularly if you've been in an organization for a long time, you might not be able to say exactly why you think that is the right decision. But if you're a data-driven product manager and you've been working with data for a long time, I think intuition often isn't just, shot in the dark. Often it is based on data. It's just maybe not data you have right in front of you at that moment in time. It's kind of your brain making connections between various pieces of data that you pulled over the years and various insights that you already have about your users. So that's what I would say. If I can and have the time to look through the data and it's a big decision, then great. But if there's room for reversing it, and also if I feel like actually that intuition is coming from sparks of data from the past, then that's when I'd be more willing to go with an intuition-based decision.
I think for me, sort of very much along the same lines, but I think what I'm trying to do is break down the intuition into actually what are the assumptions behind it, what are the ideas behind it that influence my intuition. I've never been in a situation where I had to make intuitive decision in a second, right? Even if someone asks you in the room, you probably have a chance to say, let me come back to you in half an hour, and then you can actually spend 15 minutes trying to break down your intuition is telling you what are the sort of the first principles that maybe are behind this decision that you believe in. And that really helps, right? At least I also had to always do it in order to get those decisions approved to some extent, because you had to explain your intuition in order for someone to say, yeah, go forward and do it. So I think it's a good process. And I think over time, if you actually start questioning your intuition, what you will do is over time, you'll actually find out that you get better and better at actually deciphering sort of your thoughts behind it and breaking them down into patterns. So that really helps. And I would say if there's a good logic, why not, right? It's not always you'll have data, but if the logic is clear and you're actually making a decision that maximizes your learning relatively soon about the things that you're assuming, then it's going to work out well.
I agree with both of you, and I think to add on, I think intuition for me a lot of times is a thread to pull on, right? Like that's a starting point, and then I think the other thing is oh sorry, I lost my train of thought. I think sometimes like you can use other pieces of data as a proxy, right? Like we don't necessarily need, the customer interview or the cold hard facts of the data to kind of make sure our intuition is 100% correct. Like we can kind of use examples or market research as kind of like our data to kind of support our intuition. And it's not perfect. It's not like ideal, but it can support kind of those quicker decisions. It's still data. It's not necessarily perfect, but it helps, and it's better than just kind of plainly guessing.
I think that's awesome. I think that's a good framework for folks to kind of listen to and understand, right? I think, Sari, what you were talking about, right? And Mike highlighted earlier, right? Is that idea of two-way door decisions versus one-way door decisions. If there's this kind of overquoted piece from Jeff Bezos on when you go higher and higher in a company, your job is to focus more on one-way door decisions and allow your teams to focus on the two-way door decisions. So I think that's really a powerful means to say, this is a type of decision where I can leverage intuition, even if I don't have all the information, all the data points to support me. And I think what, Mike, you were sharing a little bit on kind of how do you break down your intuition into something explainable, something logical for the team to kind of go and understand more holistically. To Kevin, your point, right? Of like it being a thread to pull on, right? It's a starting point. Your intuition can help filter out options to then focus the team and focus yourself on where to go next. I'd love for us to maybe talk about some examples if you guys have some stories, and understandable if all three of you don't have examples off the top of your mind, but maybe something that we can work with where you either leverage intuition to kind of start that process on making a product decision, or ended up your intuition contradicted maybe the quantitative data you were able to collect.
I think, a big one for me that's maybe a little bit old and maybe is a little bit obvious for people at this point in time is, but when I worked in a retailer in the past is we forced everybody to log in all the time, like all of the time. And I didn't like it. I was annoyed. Why am I logging in it was like every hour, I think it was. It was a big, like everything's very secure. And so for me, it was the intuition that this is very annoying, and we're losing a bunch of money on this. And that was the thread for me to pull on, right? It's not, again, it's like Mike said, it's not like I have to make a decision right here and then we have to go lie on this. But that's the intuition that ultimately you start pulling the data from. You start pulling your competitive analysis on. You start like setting up an A/B test. So I was able to find a spot to run like a small A/B test, to start gathering that data, to start showing the kinds of examples that showcase how much benefit our customers get and how much revenue gain we're going to get from this. That's that intuition where like I know from my experience, this is not a good customer experience. And now I can start gathering all these tiny little pieces of information to make this a good experience for our customers. And you ultimately have to go get all of that data to even convince all your stakeholders to make it happen.
I'm actually sharing in a couple of days a presentation on sort of product failures. So as I was preparing for it, I went back in time and I found a product I was working on back in 2005. It was a product at Nokia called Visual Radio. And if you have no idea what that is, at that point of time, the mobile phone connections, data connections were very slow. And the idea was to actually synchronize content with the radio so you could watch some slides about the artist's lyrics and stuff like that, essentially enrich FM radio. And I remember we've done a huge market survey with a large research agency. I'm going to name them. And that survey said that people on average will want to pay 5 to 6 euros a month for this product. When the product was built, we've actually learned that people on average wanted to pay exactly 0 for it. And if it was completely subsidized, they would use it. But the moment they had to pay anything, they were like, no, thank you. I'm gone. And I think my biggest learning from that is, in particular, pricing studies are extremely hard. And I've done many afterwards, using conjoins and different methodologies. But in the end, they give you directional, maybe, knowledge. You still have to test your pricing over and over and over again. And obviously the product was a complete flop in the end, and Nokia shut it down.
So I feel like intuition is it's such a part of the day-to-day, and there's so many decisions all the time that you assume, especially when I think you start to think, I guess, just using your own product, right? You think that it's you. So I can't think of one right now, but it did just give me an idea, if it's helpful, I don't know, for people on the call. When you talk about intuition, I immediately think back to, we've been interviewing recently a lot for senior product managers to join us at Songkick. And this just reminded me that actually, I think a lot of companies now use tasks as part of their kind of product management process, give people a bit of time away to kind of make a decision. Our task is a prioritization task. And I think when we're all talking about this, it just reminded me how often when we ask people why they chose the feature or the option they chose, so many people actually end up saying something along the lines of, it felt right, kind of intuition-based decisions. That was the one that interested me the most. And I guess one of the things that now that we're talking about it, when you're thinking about big decisions, I think that's just never a good, it's just never a good explanation, particularly in the interview process. And I don't know, it's happened so often that I thought it might just be a useful piece of advice to share right now, since I can't think of an example where I've done the exact same thing, though I'm sure I have. But I think when we're talking about intuition, always being able to back up your intuition. Your intuition should never be your proof. It always needs to be, it's just a thread. And it's never your explanation to others, like, oh, that just felt right, that's why we're doing it. It's just the thing that sparks the idea for you. And so making sure that you're always going back to back up these things. And whenever you're explaining it to stakeholders, definitely when you're explaining it to people you're interviewing with, or to anyone really, because it's the other stuff that's going to show them your skill set. And so not relying too heavily on intuition in any process where you're explaining something to someone else, I would say, is definitely my recommendation. But yeah, unfortunately, I can't think of one quite right now.
Well, good. I think those are really helpful examples for folks to kind of sit with, and also kind of parlay into their own experiences working in product. I'd love for us to maybe jump into a little bit about how you guys as companies, many of your companies are kind of built off of data in a lot of ways, right? Skyscanner is a travel aggregator that pulls in data from a multitude of travel partners, airlines and others. And in Small PDF, it sounds like you're taking all this data from the customer in the PDFs that they upload. And then for you, Sari, on the Songkick side, you're kind of building a recommendation engine around songs. Can you guys share a little bit about what it is that what data you leverage to build a better customer experience, and how do you think about bringing in that data, as well as how do you guys build all the different models and algorithms that are necessary to power those experiences for your end customer? A very broad question, but maybe you can dive into your individual companies that you're currently working at.
I can kick it off. I would say maybe on the high level, I start with thinking that, first of all, qualitative data usually answers why, quantitative data usually answers how many. So they are different questions, and usually they should go together. I think from our perspective, there's also a set of standard things you want to understand that enable your decisions across sort of the product lifecycle. So the first question that usually you want to ask is, who's your ideal customer? And for that, you're collecting the firmographic, demographic data of the target users to really understand what makes them specifically benefit from your product, but also you're trying to understand the context data. So when they are coming to your product, what drove them to that product, so you can really understand in which specific context they need it. Then essentially we look a lot at behavioral data, what they are using, how they are using, in conjunctions with what. This can help with a lot of different things. From designing the product, you can look at things like which tasks take the longest, which tasks most often fail, and you can use that to drive initiatives to improve ease of use, to improve learnability. So analytics. Then the second layer is essentially short feedback or feedback loops from customers. This is where we want their opinion on the topic. Obviously, everyone knows the NPS score. You know, would you recommend this to your friends after this wonderful experience you just had? We use a lot of those prompts. One of our favorite ones is to ask how difficult the task was versus their expectations. It helps us. I mean, one of the big things for our product is ease of use. So obviously, we want people to tell us that the task was actually even easier than they expected. And we try to essentially identify the tasks that are much more difficult and try to understand it. And then, you know, qualitative data is a lot about really understanding people and really understanding why they are coming, what they are doing, where they are failing. And I would say everything from interviews to customer immersions is really helpful, in particular in the design process, to understand how you want to enrich the designs, improve the user experience. Okay, that's all for me.
Well, I can go. So yeah, like you said, Songcake is built on data. I think we're also an aggregator, of content, and so all the information we gain out of content either comes in from our users directly, industry partners, or people like ticket vendors. But so I'm not going to talk specifically about that. That's, you know, we need that data. Without that data, there is no product. And so a big important thing for us is keeping that data really like high quality, which is difficult when you're combining data from a bunch of different sources for unique events. So it's not, you know, every data point might have to map onto another event that already exists. We can't just create new events every time we get new data in. But what I actually want to talk about more is something along the lines of, you know, understanding what your user really wants. Like I'm sure everyone listens to music here. In general, in the world, most people listen to music at some point or other. And so people have very defined taste in music. It's not what me treating like recommendations come in, and it's very important. For us, something we've been looking at a lot now is, you know, a follow or a like, similar times shown on social media platforms. They're not all equal. You know, you have very different feelings about certain artists. You might track 100 artists and be vaguely interested in their music, but there's a couple you really, really want to see in concert. There's some you would be okay not seeing ever. And there's some you maybe, depending on which friends you want to go along with. And so we've been thinking a lot about actually not just, you know, quantity of data, but how can we combine all that data to give us an understanding of quality of interest from users and intention. And that's something that's been really fascinating to work on, just figuring out what data points are useful, what different data points actually mean to a user. And, you know, unfortunately, different data points mean different things to different people. Some people might listen to a song all the time and not ever want to see that artist in concert. And someone might newly discover an artist and really want to see them in concert. So how do we figure out what these data points actually mean, and how we combine them to get a better sense of, you could call it some kind of passion score, but just getting a good idea of, you know, a like isn't a like, and moving beyond that idea that we already have a lot of information of who our users like, to actually how can we start to distinguish between the different kinds of likes and follows has been an interesting process for us and something we've been working on a lot recently.
Yeah, and for Skyscanner, I'm probably not the best person at Skyscanner to talk about this, but I'll give a brief little. Skyscanner is fairly large. We do use customer data and flights data to try to give the best flights, the cheapest flights, hotels and car hire as well. But flights is a fairly large portion of the business. But ultimately, what we're trying to do is give travelers the best option, the cheapest option, as much as possible, right? So we're scouring the internet, trying to find the best option based off of who you are, where you're located. So if you're a student, if you're a American Airlines member, if you're based in London, we're trying to give you. If you're flying out on a Thursday and might come back on a Monday, like we will use all of those things to try to give you the most amount of time for the best price, and we'll kind of recommend something based off of that. So there are definitely other product managers that can be a little bit more equipped to give you those sorts of details, but those are some of the things that Skyscanner will do to give a better user experience.
Thanks, guys. Do you want to be mindful? I think we have a couple of really great questions in the chat, and for everyone attending, please feel free to keep adding some questions. As we think about kind of some of what you guys have shared, what are some of the tools that you've leveraged? This is playing off of one of the questions in the chat. I think, Mike, you mentioned a little bit about some of the work you guys did around customer segmentation, but similarly, Kevin, Sari, if you don't mind sharing a little bit, what kind of data tools and experimentation platforms do you guys generally leverage to deliver these sorts of insights that you're describing?
Yeah, I can go. So I've definitely used several different kind of SQL platforms. So currently I am using Databricks, but I've used several other versions, everything from Google, a few that have probably gone out of favor at this point in time. So I've cycled through a few of various companies. Databricks seems to be pretty good. I don't have any kind of preference towards one or the other. A couple different A/B testing platforms. So as far as kind of buy out of the box, I prefer LaunchDarkly, but Optimizely is really nice as well. I've also had multiple in-house tools. So Skyscanner has an in-house tool that's been built, and have had a couple of those. Google Analytics has a suite of tools. Google Analytics, but Google has big data, I think, that I've used as well. So if you plan on switching companies, don't get attached, because every company will do something different and they'll switch it midway through. So just be flexible.
Yeah, I think similar to Kevin, I've been in companies that use quite a lot of different things. The consistent thread has definitely been Google Analytics for most websites that I've worked on, either as the only option or like in addition, mainly because it's free. So often there's no reason not to throw it in there even if you don't want to pay for the kind of big executive package. And a lot of the Google tools, as a result, also being free. We use Google BigQuery as our data warehouse. SQL, I found since I've learned it, is such a great tool and skill for product managers. I don't think everyone needs it, but I think even though so many of these platforms are not consistent between companies, a lot of companies will have data that is accessible with SQL. And so that is kind of one consistent skill that you can take from company to company, though not every single place will do that. And then in terms of Google also have a free A/B testing tool that we've used mainly for web. Yeah, Google Optimize, which we've used as well. So a lot of the Google tools are great. And if you're in a smaller company that may not have, some of these things are really expensive, really expensive. And so if you're maybe not even a startup, but just a company have huge budgets and you're a product and you kind of want to, you will be testing or you want to, develop more in your kind of analytical skills, Google tends to have a lot of good free things that you can use. But yeah, we use Google Analytics. A lot of our data sits in BigQuery, and so that's kind of easy to access that way as well.
Well, I can definitely agree with the point that as you move from a company to a company, you're going to encounter a different stack. There is a different stack in every company I've been with. I think right now, our challenge is relatively simple, 60 million MAUs. So when you look at some of the tools, they're going to charge you through the roof, starting with LaunchDarkly and Optimizely. And even though we are highly profitable, we're also bootstrapped, so we don't really like throwing away money left and right when we don't have to. So for our A/B testing, we actually have in-house system called Super Sarah system, named after the creator, Sarah, who actually built it. We write on Redshift. We put Metabase on top. Guess why? It's free. It's I would call it a Looker for poor. We might eventually upgrade to Looker, but Metabase has a lot of great functionalities and works out of the box and really gives you good visualizations, good interface for SQL queries. You can build quite nice dashboards for everyone. On top of that, I would say Jupyter notebooks for analysis. I am sort of a self-taught Python and data science sort of what I would call a hobbyist, but I'm dangerous enough to do my own analysis. We also have a team that obviously is much better at it, and they take care of the bigger problems as we are solving them. And that's really our core stack right now. I would also say that, as I was in companies before, at Typeform, we really liked Looker as a way to democratize data for others. I think there was a question about how you can get more people to be data driven. Well, I used to ask people to learn SQL. Eventually, I realized that about half of them will listen, the other half will not. So I took the other approach and said, okay, what tool can you offer that is SQL-like, but actually is visual drag and drop? And that's essentially Looker. So that worked really well to not only to get PMs to use it, but also the marketing department, all the other teams that traditionally, like how many marketeers? I mean, there are some marketeers that use SQL, but it's not sort of a default skill that you will find in the marketing department, but they also need to make decisions based on data. So something like Looker really helps if you can afford it.
Yeah. And Looker now is in the Google Cloud ecosystem, so can pull into Google Analytics and Google Optimize and some others. So it'll be really interesting to see that feature. Awesome. Thank you guys so much. I think that's really helpful for folks who are new to some of this, as well as might move to different companies. At least they can experience what many of you and I have experienced in changing tech stacks. I'd love for us to jump over to Q&A. We have some really great, awesome questions from those attending. Why don't we jump into one of the first questions we got, which is, so I'll read the question of the presenters. You can all see that in the presenter tab on the chat. And given the recent number of litigations around public data collection and usage, what roles do we need to play play, keeping in mind the ethics side of it all. And so I think this is around like data privacy and compliance and GDPR and other aspects that are coming to the forefront, obviously with Apple also reducing access to things like Ad ID and other things. Curious what you individually think, as well as what have the decisions of your company have been around accessing data.
I can kick it off, since I actually used to work in mobile advertising and I built mobile advertising solutions in the past. I would say that what I've learned from 4 years in mobile advertising is that 80% of people will tell you everything you want to know about them if you give them a free cow in a game. And as ridiculous as it sounds, most people are worried about privacy, but they trade privacy for convenience. And that would be the first point. But what I've also learned is in most cases, PII data actually is not helpful at all in any decision about the product and so on. So going after that data, I mean, obviously, I'm not a political consultant. I'm not trying to build a model, trying to convert some people to vote for one candidate or another candidate in the US. In those cases, it might be very valuable to know the PII information. But for most of the product decisions, you actually don't need to know it. And I think the default state is start by anonymizing all of that data and not keeping it in those queries. You really don't need that email address. You are just good enough with some kind of ID that your company will generate. And probably the address is not important. Maybe you can store the country and the region, and that's enough to make most of the decisions. So I think that would be the most important thing. And in cases where you do need that data and it does provide clear value and convenience, just make sure that you use it to provide that value and convenience, and you don't make a separate business selling it on the side. Because that's really the problem, where the data is the business, but really how the data is obtained is some kind of entertainment product or social product.
I think for me on this one, this is the one time that I don't listen to your intuition about how you feel about this, right? Like how you feel about your phone number being collected or your email being collected in this way, like, is irrelevant. Like, I don't care if my phone number is collected here, right? Like, it's not you, it's everybody else. Stick to like look up the law, look up like what it, like, especially if you're working multinationally, like spend the time to learn how it works. It's very complicated. It does matter. Very much like Mike said, like, you're probably not going to gain that much benefit from it. So spend the time. Don't just kind of make assumptions. I think it does reward both yourself, the company, to spend some time kind of diving deep into it and getting it right.
Yeah, I definitely agree with both of you. I think we've not so far found that we don't collect a lot of data at StoneCake even when you create an account. Not creating a lot of data also helps us speed up the process of people creating accounts. And in general, demographics, I'm sure there's impact there, but what's important is, what music people are interested in, who they want to see in content. And so we don't spend a lot of time collecting things that aren't related to that. Probably maybe a side thing is, I think as a product person, the only time you kind of come up against what might feel like a wall is when you think that the only reason you want the data is to provide value to users. And sometimes I can feel, I know we've had times where, we didn't want the advertising ID, for example, for advertising, or any kind of unique ID for that case, but because we thought it would help us create the best recommendation, or we needed a certain amount of information. I know as a product person that can feel really frustrating, but at the end of the day, the law is really the law. There's reasons for everything, and users get to choose how they use your products and what information they give you. But agree, if you're focusing on providing value, and also providing the value that the user actually wants from you, not necessarily kind of going rogue and doing things that they've not asked for with data that they don't know you're using, you're probably doing the right thing. If your product is just to get the data to do other things with it and to make a bunch of money off of things that you probably should be doing, then you should probably rethink. But I think when you're providing users with clear value, like we collect the email because we send out notifications to users, and that's the main way that they don't miss the contest they want to go to. And that's really clear for users why we're collecting that. If you're collecting, their home address, if we were collecting their home address, they probably wouldn't understand why, because contents are happening at their home. And so I think balancing that out as well.
Awesome. Yeah, I think that's a really helpful piece to all of this is, there is kind of, we have a responsibility, right, when we are collecting these different pieces of information about a user, right? To Kevin, your point, right? It's like, it's not so much about your personal expectation of privacy, but what, your society and governmental institution is requiring wherever you're launching your products. I think that's a really good takeaway. I'd love for us to maybe wrap on a question that I think is a good tie-in, which is to say, obviously all of us work in product, but sometimes the business that we are within have different metrics, right? And so how do you guys go about really tying the product metrics, like your OKRs, to what it is the business is trying to accomplish, and the mission that it's going to try to achieve in the world?
I think there was some question about the North Star metric for Skyscanner, and I'll be actually very curious to hear what the North Star metric is. But I would say that's usually a good point that joins the two sides. North Star metric should be something that measures the value that customers get and measures and somehow ties to your revenue, and optimally your actual pricing plan reflects the value that you create for customers, or at least for SaaS, that's kind of like the default mode. So when we were at Typeform, the North Star metric was the total number of responses we collect, and obviously to surveys, to research, and so on. Because when we asked customers how they think about the success, they told us, I think about the number of responses I'm getting because this is data. And or in case of people who are using Typeform, for example, for collecting leads, this is actual leads that convert into money. So it's clearly how I'm going to evaluate the ROI. And obviously for Typeform, also, if you collect 1 million responses on your account, that's a much higher cost than if you collect 1,000 responses on your account. So it makes sense to charge you a little bit more if you're going through certain tiers. For us at Small PDF right now, we think of this as the number of documents we process every month. That obviously can also vary between customers, and we do have some customers who can process 30,000 documents in a month. I think that was the largest I've seen. But in general, most of them consuming a similar pattern, so it's tied actually to the number of customers, which ties to our business model. But at the same time, we count when customers download the document, because we know that then they were successful with our platform. They came in, they wanted to achieve something, they wanted to create some kind of document, they downloaded it, or they shared it with someone else via our platform. Okay, they've been successful. That means they will be coming back, and that nicely ties to essentially the revenue, to retention, and so on. We do have a metric tree that goes a few steps below, so we understand what drives every single individual sort of sub-metric and sub-metric and so on. And I think that is particularly helpful because as you have more and more product teams, their ability to directly influence North Star is very small. But if they understand a metric that they own that indirectly or directly influences the North Star, then they can see something that actually moves regularly. It can be a feedback to their decisions, because I think, Kevin, you mentioned earlier that we want to measure essentially the decisions, and then this is the ability to measure them. This is the ability to see that the decisions are correct that they are taking. And they also understand how they fit into a broader company, because they understand essentially how their product affects the overall North Star. And I would say, this kind of trees, I think, are really good at helping also to teams to understand their mission, understand how they are actually fitting within the company. So I'm a big fan.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I just want to echo everything you said, which is finding first of all, if your revenue doesn't align to the value you're offering users, which is, I think it's easier for that to happen than you think. We definitely kind of strayed into that territory a couple of times where revenue was coming from something that wasn't necessarily value like driving for users, then that you're already off to a bad start. And because sometimes easy revenue might not come from the value assigned with users, and actually that's the more difficult revenue, but it's also the revenue that means you don't get into too many conflicts, because then you start choosing between value and revenue, value for users and revenue, which I think is a really hard place to be in, and just generally bad for everyone. So yeah, if your revenue aligns with the value your users are getting, then both your business metrics and your product metrics should also align with that, and they're just at different levels until they're easier to tie together. I think often they're more difficult to tie together when sometimes there's a misalignment there between like the ultimate value a user is getting and what is driving revenue, or what your business is prioritizing, or what your business is focusing on for the future. If that isn't directly tied to user value, and I think that's where it becomes a lot more difficult to tie those two things together. For us, we focus on people buying tickets to concerts, so people clicking on ticket links to go to concerts. That's ultimately what we're here to do, is to get more people to more concerts. That's what users are using our products for. And so if we can go all the way down to like views of event pages, ticket clicks, and all the way up to actual revenue driving from sales and order conversion in between, but they're all really along that line of what are we trying to get users to do. There's other ways of getting, we have revenue drive revenue that aren't directly along that path per se, but that's why I think the North Star focuses you in on, this is the most important thing, and we're not going to divert focus from this for these other more ancillary problems or revenue driving things.
Yeah, I think that that alignment that Sarah talked about is super helpful, and I think with Skyscanner, I'll try to answer two questions in one here. With Mike called out is, with Skyscanner, it makes it really easy for me, right? So with Skyscanner, I'll use flights because it's the majority of our business. For revenue, it's really travelers coming in and booking flights. And there's really two ways to do that. There's one, which is you come to the site, you see a flight that you like, and you click on that link, and maybe you go to American Airlines and you book that flight. We'll track that all the way through. And the second way is where I focus most of my time, which is you can actually book that flight directly on skyscanner.com. So there's a portion of our business that you can check out and buy the flight there. So we have really great alignment with customer value, which is, I would like to buy a flight. I would like to buy a cheap, good flight. And that's where the revenue comes from. So, we get revenue from the purchase of the flight. The traveler wants the flight. And for me, that is really making my product a good, seamless, easy experience for that traveler. I measure abandonment rate, checkout rate, kind of the overall basket value of that checkout, all those different things, all those different metrics to see that they're performing well, and that they're ultimately aligning to that North Star metric of, how many travelers that came in actually booked a flight. So it's kind of an easy step down for me to track that customer value.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. So we're at time. We're a little past it. I think we had some really great discussion. I love the fact that you guys touched on the last question I was going to ask, which is the North Star metric. And so thank you so much for sharing your experiences. I know I learned a lot, and I'm hopeful many others who attended today got to learn a lot from all of you. So thank you. I'll give it back to you, Caitlin, to wrap us up.
Thank you so much. Well, thank you to our great panel and to you, Anjana, for moderating such a great session, and to all of our attendees for asking some really great questions and keeping this discussion going in the chat. So if you do want to keep chatting, then feel free to jump over to the PLA Slack channel, where you can keep the discussion going and connect with people there. or stick around for our next session, which is starting in 10 or so minutes. So yeah, big thanks to everyone, and I shall see you all soon. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
bye.